Oh, hey, we're live. Hi, everybody. My name is, we never know when it's going to go live. So we're always kind of in the middle of a conversation when this happens. But
Yep.
welcome to MullerSheWrote.com and welcome to Simon Rosenberg, who writes for the Hopium Chronicles, who, whenever I need a jolt of facts and reality about some of the good things that are happening and some of the wins that we are seeing, I always share widely his writings and his musings and some of the things that he covers. And so I'm really, really excited. I don't think we've ever done an interview.
No. And listen, we were talking earlier that you're like one of my internet friends, right? That during the course of this journey we've been on over the last 10 years, I have probably reposted hundreds or thousands of things that you've written or tweeted or blue skied or whatever. So it's just great to be here with you. Well, not really in person, but at least in the same feed. And so it's just great to hang out. So thank you for the invitation, Allison.
Yeah, and right back at you, because I know what it's like to want to highlight wins that we've seen over the last decade, and how once you do that, you can sometimes be overwhelmed with negative messaging. um, I at one point. I'm one of the most blocked people on social media because people can't stand somebody once put it as how I command an army of flying hope monkeys that I send out into the internet, the media sphere. And somebody who listens to the Daily Beans actually made me a cross stitch of me and my flying hope monkey. So I thought I'd share that.
That's pretty amazing, by the way. I get things from my audience. I have a shot, this drawing of my dog, Tug, who recently passed away, but that came from my audience, but I haven't gotten anything about hope monkeys, so maybe someday there's hope for me too.
Well, there has to be a reason you named your Substack the Hopium Chronicles, right?
Yeah. So let me just talk, since you've asked, and I haven't talked about this in a while. One of my sort of big insights of having, I've been working full time in Democratic politics for over 30 years. I started my career as a TV producer and writer, so I grew up on the media side of the business, and I've always been sort of in the comms, side of politics. Is that I came to believe during the course of Trumpism that one of his central strategies and MAGA's central strategies was to pump negative sentiment into our discourse every day and to make us feel bad about our country, our leaders, our institutions, each other, everything, right? Our economy, the American mission. And that we needed at a strategy level to respond to that negative sentiment by putting positive sentiment into the world. That it was actually not something we're doing because we just wanted to feel better, but because that negative sentiment was a precursor for Trump to push his radical politics. Because if everything is broken and the country's horrible and everything is terrible, and you hear him say this all the time, right? Everything is terrible. He got up at the UN this week and told every country in the world their countries are horrible, right? This is a precursor for him to then have radical solutions like ending American democracy and installing himself as a dictator if everything is broken and terrible. So we have to, when he talks down America, we need to talk it up. And this is not to make me feel better. This is how one of the essential tactics I think we have to deploy to beat him over time, because his representation, and the person who really first turned me on to this was Anne Applebaum. And Anne Applebaum in 2016 wrote a column, or I saw her on TV. I don't remember, talking about how Trump's speech at the Republican convention sounded as if it could have been written by Moscow, that all of the indictments, there was nothing uplifting about America. It was all the terrible things that we had done. And she was so shocked by it because it was such an un-American speech. And it was the beginning of me really starting to think about, discourse, of us taking greater responsibility of managing our discourse, and that how specifically, and then she's since written about how the new strategy of authoritarians is not to tell you how good their countries are, but to tell you how bad yours is, as a matter of strategy to create, again, this kind of sense that we need something radically different than what we had. So I think hopium is in part, and it really came about through Nate Silver in 2022, a week before the election, when I was saying that I thought the election was going to go better for us and there was going to be no red wave. He accused me of smoking hopium and misleading the Democratic Party. And so when I founded my Substack and community a few months later, I used that as a way of acknowledging that part of the project was to reject the bullshit and to reject the corruption of our information space, and to be far more purposeful about lifting America up and lifting each other up than tearing us down as part of my central undertaking. And so I haven't really talked about this in a long time, but that's part of the behind it. And so what I do every day, I write 7 days a week, is that I try to stay very focused on not dwelling on all the terrible things that are happening, but what do we do to make it more likely that we can mitigate the damage and win back power? And that's what we're focused on in the hopium community.
Ah, Nate Silver. Yeah. He and I got into a little bit of a tussle when I pointed out that the Wall Street Journal poll that many corporate media conglomerates and 538, his podcast, were relying on about what the United States voters thought about Joe Biden and his age, that Wall Street Journal poll kicked off the push to get Biden out of the race. I noted that the pollster that did that poll is Fabrizio Lee, run by Tony Fabrizio. And if you'd like to go, do a word search for Fabrizio in the Mueller report, you'll find that he comes up quite often in the Mueller report. And so when I pointed that out, a lot of people, including Steve Kornacki and Nate Silver and whoever hosts the 538 Politics podcast, I can't remember their names, it's not Nate Silver himself, called me out and said that I was ignoring reality and, again, smoking hopium. And first of all, I didn't reach out for comment at all.
No, that's not the style.
They just dragged me on their podcast.
Yeah.
So look, that's my run-in with
yeah, no. Look, I think that what there has been, the fact that President Trump's pollster is, while he's working for Trump, does a poll that is considered to be independent, is part of the corruption of the whole information space around polling, right? I mean, what happened with the red wave in 2022 and why everyone got the election wrong was that independent polling showed the race close, but the Republicans dropped 50 of these very right-wing polls that were far more Republican than the independent polling. And those got put into the polling averages, and the polling averages then moved to the right. And so if you were just following the polling averages, you saw a red wave. If you disaggregated those polls from the polling averages, the independent polls, you showed a close competitive election. And so I had the audacity to dismiss 50 polls that the way the system works, right, is that what Nate Silver was telling us at the time is that, hey, even if these are Republican funded polls, you throw everything into the blender and it all comes out okay. But garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, this was an attempt to game the polling averages. The same thing happened in 2024. They, instead of 50 polls, they had 150 polls in 2024. And so, like every other part of the information space that we live in, now polling and early vote data are contested spaces by the right, where they use illicit tactics to gain advantage. I mean, this shouldn't be a big surprise. I mean, once you try to overturn the American government in 2021, throwing 50 right-wing polls into the polling averages is like, miniature golf compared to what Trump had done in 2021, right? And so, but the polling industrial complex defends itself because so many people make money off of interpreting this stuff. And so, of course, the poll averages can't be gamed. And of course, this isn't some kind of illicit plot. And Simon, you sound like a paranoid, leftist, and you're not living in reality. And we even had it just happen this week. Let me just go through this, right? So in New Jersey, there have been, in Mikey Sherrill's race, there have been 6 public polls taken in the last few weeks. She's up by an average of 8 points in those polls. The data is very consistent. It's all the same kind of basic data. She's up in the high 40s. He's in the low 40s. And then yesterday, a poll dropped from Emerson, which used to be an independent pollster, but which is now on the right wing polling gravy train, that showed the race dead even. So instead of being up 8, and then the story was, Mikey Sherrill struggling and falling, and Citarelli is like gaining, and then I went and looked at it this morning, and the poll was paid for by Nexstar. Yeah, right. I know. And, the people who are the anti Jimmy Kimmel, pro, Trump, media organization. And the data in it was implausible. It was just implausible. But because it gets amplified by the right, all those other polls, and yesterday there was another poll released by a right-wing pollster that had the race +7 for Sherrill. So this is an example, of them gaming the information environment that we live in, right, to make us weak and make them strong, which is the whole Trump thing, right? Trump, in my view, has this kind of one prism that he sees politics, which is that he's strong, we're weak, he's winning, we're losing, he's successful, we're failures, he's a hero, we're villains. And so part of what we have to do is we have to flip that on him, and we have to make him weak and us strong, and we have to make him a loser and us winners, and him a failure and us successful, and him a villain and us heroes, right? The way in Hopium, I call him, not a strong man, but a big blubbery baby man, is a line that we use. And so part of this is understanding the way they do politics and getting ahead of it and trying to anticipate it. So it's a long about story saying that the Hopium thing came about as somebody who had been doing press and media in national politics, grew up as a journalist, that I felt something had changed in the information space where when Republicans spoke, they were more credible, and when we spoke, our stuff was more dismissed, that when their strengths were being overestimated and ours underestimated. And this is different than what it was 6 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. There's been a change. And some of this is just the loudness and effectiveness of the right-wing noise machine, just putting tremendous downward pressure on the legacy media every day. And in 2022, basically, they bullied their way into this red wave narrative, which was false, and everybody fell for it. And that's why I shut down the organization I was running at the time called NDN, which I had started 27 years ago. It's like a private think tank for the Democratic Party. And I moved my work to Substack because I wanted to reach more people and use this new media myself, not just talk about it, but do it myself, right? And so I founded Hopium with the idea being that, we were in an increasingly adversarial information space, and that we needed to be more purposeful about challenging it. And that's what I try to do 7 days a week.
Yeah, and we thank you for it. And you're right. This is part of the propaganda. It's part of the authoritarian playbook, to make everything miserable and say I alone can fix it, and then to come out with all of these right-wing polls is also part of the propaganda. I think Pete Buttigieg put it really well when he said Donald Trump wants you to think he's way more popular than he is, and he doesn't want you to know that you have way more power, as much power as you do. And that's part of it. Since the beginning, since he lied about the inaugural crowd size,
Right? I know.
lies about the landslide election that was won, by a point and a half, a mandate landslide, so that he can move forward with all of this. And the polling stuff was right there in front of our eyes in the Stormy Daniels case, when they put up that crucial piece of evidence that showed pay Stormy Daniels $160,000 and pay. What a lot of people didn't notice was a payout to a group called Redfinch for $50,000 that Donald Trump okayed, and only a couple of us were talking about the fact that that was a poll rigging payment, and I thought that was kind of a story, but nobody seemed to really want to run with it.
Well, because it was early, right? It's before we all came to kind of understand. I have friends who polled in the third world, and these kinds of fake polls are much more common outside of the Anglophone countries, right? Where and where people dump fake polls and then they use them to influence the coverage of races. And so that's come here. That's part of our system now. We have to be wise about it. But I will say, I mean, going back to what you said earlier, is that Trump's Trump's drop in polling this year has been staggering.
Yeah.
It is, and it is. I still, as somebody who's been studying polling for over 30 years, I'm still amazed how far he's fallen given their information superiority over us. Right.
Yeah. Thinking
And,
that it's
and
probably worse than it's being presented for him.
right. It's comprehensive. It's across the board. By some measures, he's now more unpopular than he was 8 years ago. And remember, and why that matters is that he only got 46% of the vote 8 years ago. He got 50 this time. So the fact that he's underneath where he was 8 years ago means that he's fallen much further. He's fallen, by huge double digits, huge double digits with young people and Hispanics and moderates and independents and people making less than $50,000 a year. And on the thing that is the number one issue in the country, which is affordability and prices, he's down 30, minus 30, minus 35. And so structurally, he's in deep shit, right? The country has rejected him. And what's important, Allison, getting back to the way that you were talking about this earlier, is that part of his impotency, right? Because of all the things that Donald Trump would never want to be is impotent, right? And to have the sense of his power is ebbing, is that they've been unable to stop this decline. And that what happened is this decline began in June when Elon spent 3 days attacking him on Twitter, breaking into the right-wing MAGA bubble, emasculating Trump, which is really what that was about. Trump was emasculated, right, by Elon Musk. He even raised the issue of him getting replaced by J.D. Vance. And Trump has been steadily dropping since then. And what happened is within 48 hours of Elon finishing his 3-day attack on Trump, we had LA happen, the invasion of LA, right? So Trump has tried all these spectacular things to regain his manliness and his power and his strength. He's bombed Iran. He's passed the big ugly bill. He's invaded 2 cities, right? He's fired people. He's now indicted Comey. And all of this, I think, is being driven to some degree by this psychological need that he has to feel powerful when he isn't feeling powerful and his powers are ebbing. I think he is in significant cognitive and physical decline. I think this is no longer, I think it's not even really an open question anymore. And so he's responding to that, unfortunately for all of us. I mean, the way I used this today at Hopium is that we're all battered wives, that he came home from having one of the worst weeks and he beat us all up by putting tariffs on us and going after Comey and escalating his attacks on his opposition. And that, he takes out his disappointments on all of us and on the country. And because he is not governing for us or with us, but against us now, right? His administration is in opposition to the American people and the American way of life. His economic strategy has hurt us. He's attacking our healthcare system. He's dismantling the best biomedical research, ecosystem in the world. You go through he's made us a laughingstock around the world. He's put tariffs on countries all over the world, which are alienating consumers and governments in ways that are going to have generational impact, multi-generational impact on our standing in the world. He's like a wrecking ball in American society and our country. And the thing is, the American people are figuring this out. And that's where he's in trouble, right? Is that people have come to realize, I think, 2 things in polling in the last few weeks. One is they know he's doing incredible harm to the economy and their own lives. But the other thing that has really spiked in polling, Allison, and you'll appreciate this, is questions around threat to democracy. Those were very secondary questions 2 months ago, 3 months ago. They now have moved way up in polling just in the last 2 weeks, right? Since the aftermath or escalation after the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk, there's been a huge spike in concern around threats to democracy, as there should be. And I think this is part of what pushed Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to be more aggressive in confronting Trump, right? Because they realized that the American people wanted them to do it, and it gave them permission to do it. And, I'm really proud of them. I mean, I think we're in the fight now that many of us wanted to have with Trump. And it took us a while and probably a lot later than many of us would have wanted, but we're here now and
Mm.
we need to go win it.
I'll be on board with you after I see what happens with the continuing resolution because I didn't agree with what happened with it last time.
Yeah.
But there is movement, right? We When we use our collective voice, we took, for example, Gavin Newsom from, hosting Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on his podcast and throwing the trans community under the bus to stopping all of that, standing up, putting on the boxing gloves, lacing them up, getting in the ring and fighting with Prop 50. And by the way, the amazing woman running his social media account is pretty fantastic too. So also, I think you're right. I think Jeffries and Schumer are hearing the people say, "Stand up, fight for us, go to bat for us. Even if you lose, we just want to see you get in the fight. You lose it 100% of the shots you don't take, right?"
Yeah.
But what I think we're seeing here with you know standing up to a bully, people are learning. And maybe they didn't believe it at first. Maybe they didn't take E. Jean Carroll's word for it. That when you stand up to a bully, when you look at him across a courtroom and see nothing more than a small, mediocre man that is not a threat, and you stand up to him, you can win. We've seen some of the law firms do this. We've seen the Wall Street Journal, believe it or not, hold their ground on the Epstein birthday book. We saw the invasion of Los Angeles and D.C., and then the threats of the invasion to Chicago. But then we saw J.B. Pritzker stand up and put his foot down and say no. And those didn't materialize to the length that I think that the Trump administration would have wanted that invasion of Chicago to materialize into. We saw Kimmel and Disney fight back, and that was an historic night in television. I cannot tell you, and it's not about the fact that it's Jimmy Kimmel or the content of his monologue, which was great, because I happen to agree with what he's saying. But it was that somebody stood up to him and he came back and across platforms got 26 million viewers
Yeah. It was amazing.
uh, for that monologue and his return. And that's a huge win for free speech. We see the Epstein files with Adelita Grajova winning. Actually, it didn't matter who won in Arizona. Both the Republican and the Democrat were going to be the 218th signature on the discharge petition to release the Epstein files. But Grajova won 70-30. It's a Democratic district, Arizona 7th. She took the last 15 months of the seat that was vacated when her father, Raul, sadly passed away during complications in cancer treatment. But she won that election, and now we're seeing a panic at the disco in the top echelon of the Republican Party about how are we going to block the Epstein files. I think they thought it would go away when they all sat down in the Situation Room. They went into the Situation Room, the place where we planned how to take out Osama bin Laden, and devised an Epstein plan. And their plan was to go to the court to try to get a 76-page FBI transcript and make sure the court said no so that they could blame the courts. And then, to keep trying to push back on this Epstein story that is just not going away, which is interesting because they themselves perpetuated it. And so we're there now, and we're about to get that final signature. I'm sure there'll be shenanigans, Mike Johnson shenanigans, but that's good news. And also, what I like to look at, polls are interesting. I like to watch the polls that get the Simon Rosenberg treatment because they pull out the Tony Fabrizios of the world and the Rasmussens of the world. But aside from that, we are just smashing elections.
Yeah.
Every single election, I think, except for two, Florida 1 and Florida 6, we've won. And in Florida 1 and Florida 6, we made up 12 or 22 points or respectively. And to see that people power beats money, I think really is a shot in the arm for folks. When we saw what happened in Wisconsin, where Elon dumped
Yeah.
$25 million and we won there. When we see what happens with, Cuomo getting all this money dumped into his race in the mayoral race for New York and Mamdani being so far ahead. because he's running on a message of affordability, and actually going and talking to the people and finding out what they want and running on what the people want. It's really fantastic to watch, and it does give me a lot of hope for where we're headed.
Listen, I think that just in using traditional elections, right, as a guide, and because so much of what's happening is outside of traditional politics right now, we've had a great year, and we have been overperforming at a very elevated level, almost too high in some ways because it can't really be true. But we're overperforming at a higher level than we were at this point 8 years ago, and we won the midterm elections by 8.6 points in 2018. I was a chief strategist for the DCCC in that cycle when we flipped the House, and so we're actually doing better in local and special elections than we were 8 years ago, and it was a blowout win. And so we should be encouraged that, assuming we have elections next year and that everything happens, that we're on track to have really good midterms. And I think that the fall elections are all very promising. Abby Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill have sturdy and significant leads, and the California ballot initiative looks very promising. We have to make sure people turn out and vote. I mean, that's a big unknown there. California's had significant drop off in recent elections and turnout problems. New York, is settled in my view, unless something dramatic happens. And then Pennsylvania, I'm optimistic about us retaining those Supreme Court seats. And so, we talk at Hopium about winning the fall, and winning the fall has two pieces. One is winning all these elections and hopefully by large margins that make it clear that Trump is being repudiated and this kind of politics is being repudiated. But it's also about winning the debate over what's happening around the budget, because as you pointed out, there's two steps to the budget now, right? There's the continuing resolution, which just gives them more time to go negotiate, because so everybody understands, fiscal year runs out next on Tuesday, and there is no budget. I mean, there's supposed to be a budget. They're supposed to have passed it by now. There isn't any budget. There's nothing to negotiate over. There's nothing. And what the Republicans thought they would do is get what's called a clean CR, which is just create another month or 2 months for negotiations to happen. But they weren't willing to negotiate over that. And so why did we believe there was going to be negotiations over the budget, right? Because to pass a budget under the current system, they need 7 Democratic votes. And so what's happened is that Schumer and Jeffries decided to sort of accelerate the budget debate by saying, if you want our votes in the CR, these are the things we need, which we were going to ask for anyway, right? In the end, budget negotiation. But people should realize that this budget debate that we're in now is going to be taking place over the next 2 to 3 months. There's going to be the initial skirmish over the CR. But, at some point, an actual budget of the United States has to pass. And what's going to be interesting is whether or not there's anything the Republicans can put forward that would get 7 Democratic votes. Or are we going to see them getting rid of the filibuster and passing the budget along a party line vote, which is, my assumption is that it is, let me say this, I think it's very likely that this debate over the next 2 to 3, 4 months is going to end up in them getting rid of the filibuster, because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how Democrats can vote for tripling the budget of ICE or for the tariffs or for make your own list of stuff. It's been so extreme. And so, this is why I think this is a more titanic and big fight. And the fight that we're really in now is not about healthcare. It's about Trump's betrayal of the country, his failure to deliver for the American people, his failed economic strategy. All of this stuff is all fair game in this coming fight. And I think we've started with healthcare, but my assumption is, Allison, that you're going to see Democrats expanding the attacks on him to include the economy and the threats to democracy. And even if you look at the ads, you often know where a party is based on their ads, not based on whatever they're saying. The DCCC's main ads in the swing districts this week are on tariffs and affordability, healthcare and shutdown, chaos. The DNC ads that have gone up in 3 states are about threats to freedom of speech and the First Amendment. So we have ads on the air now that are not just about healthcare, but they're also about affordability and the economy and about threats to democracy. In my view, that's a welcome development because these are, I think, more where the voters want us to engage based on polling. And we're now sort of going to the place where we have greatest advantage and where he's most vulnerable. So I've been very encouraged this week at kind of a nerdy, tactical, political consultant strategist level that the evolution that I'm seeing in the narrative and story is where I think this needs to go, and it's making us stronger, our arguments, more durable over many months, and that, and the point you made earlier is Schumer and Jeffries, are fighting, and Hakeem has clearly found a higher gear in the last few days. His
Yeah,
public commentary has been, it's organic, it's coming from him, right? It feels good. I think they're just really happy to be let loose and fighting with this guy. And so, what it means for all of you watching today is that, we need to be doing everything we can, not only to win these fall elections, but we need to win this big debate with the Republicans about what they're doing to the country. And that debate is now joined. And it's the debate we've all wanted. And now we got to go win it.
I agree. And speaking of the filibuster, I mean, that's what I've been saying all week is, people are saying Democrats are going to shut down the government. And I said, no, it is 100% up to the Republicans. If they shut down the government, the Republicans shut down the government. And somebody said, oh, yeah, but don't you need cloture? Isn't there a filibuster? I said, the Republicans have enough votes to change the rules. Even if they nuke the filibuster entirely, or maybe they carve it out for continuing resolutions only, or whatever, they are in charge of the rules of the Senate. And therefore, if they feel that keeping the government open is crucial, they can do it. They can make it happen. And if the government shuts down, it's because they didn't make it happen. And
Agreed.
I want to talk about what you said about assuming we have elections in 2026, because I know a lot of people fear that, but I do have some breaking news for you that I think you'll appreciate. Sinclair is putting Jimmy Kimmel back on the air in its 38 ABC TV stations. Sinclair said in a statement Friday it will end its preemption of Jimmy Kimmel Live, and the show will return Friday on Sinclair's ABC affiliates. The September 26th airing of the show is a rerun of Tuesday's show, featuring Kimmel's return after ABC suspended him.
Well, having worked at ABC in my youth and spent a year working for an executive there dealing with the way that the 200 plus affiliates carry the news every night, this kind of break with the network from Sinclair and Nexstar really is unusual, perhaps unprecedented. And it was going to start raising questions about the overall affiliate relationship with the network. There's really never been anything done like this before that's been so dramatic. And without, knowing how this all works, the business side of all this, this was completely unsustainable. And I'm not really surprised that they're capitulating because it would have, I'm sure that ABC and Disney told them that, look, if you don't reaffiliate, if you don't carry the show, we're going to start questioning our broader affiliation with your stations, right? And the network has a lot more leverage here than people really understand. And so I was a little surprised that Sinclair and Nexstar sort of so kind of righteously immediately said we're not going to carry Kimmel, because that was Disney and ABC have, could de-affiliate, and then those stations are effed, right? From a business standpoint.
And
Yeah,
the
yeah,
shareholders were pushing back against this.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's another example of people power over money. So many
yeah.
people, so many of us canceled. And of course, this is about the money for them. But that's because of us.
Right. Agreed. Totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a big, we'll see what happens with Nexstar, and because they were the ones that had that merger, right? That they were more
The Tegna merger.
yeah, that they were more worried about, but we'll see what happens. Look, I think you're right that and I love the way that you went through all of the wins and sort of the progress. The way I call it is that what the language I use is that the circle of defiance is growing, right? And that we need to keep growing the circle of defiance and sort of having awareness that companies like Disney and ABC have a role to play in creating greater defiance, and that the movement to defy him has to include civil society organizations, not just traditional political organizations. and I agree with you. I haven't written a lot about the Jimmy Kimmel stuff. I in my writing, I put his monologue, but it was really kind of an incredible thing to watch. If you don't mind me just reflecting, because you brought it up, is that about how real it was. Like we're in it now, like we're in it. And I think, and this is, and like he almost went down and he came back and he fought. Who knows what really happened? We all did our thing, but who knows what he did internally, right? And it was a huge win. And he was so his tone of his monologue was so amazing. He kept it together the whole time. He didn't over like dig at people. I think he was, felt fortunate and lucky that this had all kind of worked out. But he's now become a powerful warrior for free speech in our democracy. And who knows, that's the thing, Allison, right? Is that history calls people and sometimes they answer and sometimes they don't. Right. And
Look at
Jimmy,
Zelensky.
yeah, look at Zelensky, look at Jimmy Kimmel, right? And I would say look at Hakeem and Chuck Schumer are starting. I think they are beginning to step into their own power, right? And I think that this was hard for them for reasons that we could sit here and debate for 3 years, right? But it is happening now, and we have to continue to lift people up and encourage them. And one of the things that all of you do, we talk about this at Hopium all the time. You can call your congressional offices and the Senate offices to the line we use is that you have to let them know what's expected of them now, right? Is the way we talk about it. But it's also to thank them. I think it's really important for people to get used to calling their elected leaders when they do things that you're happy about. And they need to hear that too, and because I do think that part of our job and our movement is to lift people up and not just only tear them down. And I think that, telling leaders that you're grateful for their leadership when they lead, it's an important part, a tactic for us
Yeah, I'll
to
tell them when I
encourage.
think they're doing a poor job, and when they
Yeah.
do the right thing, I'll tell them that I think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I think positive reinforcement is important. And,
Yeah.
you talk about the circle of defiance. I remember I interviewed Miles Taylor about his book Blowback, and he was anonymous when he wrote his op-ed in his first book. And he talked about the price of dissent. And he basically brought up an old economics 101 tenet that, if you want to decrease the price of something, you have to increase the supply. And when you talk about dissent or defiance, if you're only one or two voices, the price of dissent is very high. But when that circle of defiance grows, the price of dissent goes down. And that's why I think it's so very important that we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of fact core revelations from Christians on the right on TikTok over the last few weeks, especially since Charlie Kirk waking up, so to speak. We're seeing a lot more people, and that expansion of the circle of defiance gives people a permission structure, makes it feel safer to come out and dissent and defy what's going on in their government. And I think it's crucial, and I love that you talk about that. And I wanted to, before we get out of here,
Yeah.
we're already 10 minutes over time, but thanks
we
to
can
everybody
we
for
can
hanging
talk all
in.
day. We can
I
talk all
know,
day.
I know.
Yeah.
So we've
Yeah.
never talked before, so
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
fantastic. But you had mentioned the elections. A lot of people, and I get a lot of folks replying to my social media posts saying, it's funny that you think we're going to have elections in 2026 or 2028. Then I point out we've been having elections and we've been winning them by quite a bit. And I like to move forward with the assumption that we will have free and fair elections and that I will be voting in them because I don't want to discourage anyone. People spend on the right billions of dollars to make us think our vote doesn't matter and to fill us with apathy and to make us roll over and say voting isn't going to matter. There's not going to be an election, et cetera. And so I don't like to spread that message, but I do very much understand people's concerns about it. And I was wondering how you address that.
Yeah. I the way I address it is evolving a little bit, and I share your um, concern that people are very flippant about something that's so important, and that by raising it, it's sort of demobilizing. I mean, if we don't act every day as if there's going to be free and fair elections and do everything we can to win them, then we won't. Right. And so anything that anybody does that discourages people from doing the work that's required to win these elections this fall or the elections next year by saying, well, what are you doing, Simon? There's no elections. I mean, you are being as corrosive and damaging as MAGA is when you do that, right? Because, if we don't do everything we can to win the elections, then we won't win the elections. And so we have to act as if they are going to happen under any circumstances. But I do think that given what's happened in the last few weeks, we have to take what Trump and Stephen Miller and Kash Patel are saying at face value. And I think that it would be wrong for us at this point in this journey with Trump to do anything other than to take them at face value. And I think that the way I talk about this at Hopium is that his decline and his ebbing powers is what's accelerating and putting energy behind his escalation. That he is literally scared of people now. He's got the military in Washington to make sure he's okay, right, and protected, and that he's fearful of the people. He's become fearful of his decline. He's
He's afraid
worried.
of escalators, Simon.
He's afraid of escalators. But he's afraid of that. The guy in the walled castle. He's afraid of the peasants with the pitchforks outside, right? And I think he has become scared because he's been unable to stop his decline. And polling matters to him. I mean, this stuff, he wants adulation, right? He wants to be liked, he wants to be loved, and he's being hated. The intensity of his opposition now is much higher than where it was 8 years ago. And that's the fuel that we're using to do the No Kings rallies and everything else. But the way I talk about the election is that I think now that we have to both do everything we can to operate within the traditional political and electoral domain and win and keep prosecuting our advantage. And there needs to start to be this separate conversation about his growing illiberalism and his descent into authoritarianism and ways of mitigating that damage. And one of the things that I'm going to start doing my own homework on is that there has been writing done by people who study this stuff in other countries that when you start engaging the public in the threats to the election and what they might do, it actually makes it far less likely that they will actually execute on these plans, right? And so we now have to start taking this seriously, the way we were talking earlier about the polling is kind of this new information domain, right? We need to take the question about what is it that they could really do in this highly decentralized, federalized system that we have, and to start normalizing it with people that they may try this stuff. And so if it starts happening, that they don't think we're conspiracy theorists, right? I think we've got educating to do in our own communities and our own public to both, by the way, to narrow down what's the realm of the possible. I think there's a lot of kind of conspiratorial, he's just going to cancel the elections. Well, that's not possible, right? So the question is, what is possible? And for us to not, neither come at this either. It's like anything else. If you want to win, you got to have realistic understanding. You've got to have a strategy and you got to go execute against it. And right now, I think we don't have any of that and that we need to develop that, and happy to do that with you in collaboration with you because you're very thoughtful on these matters. But I
I
also
would
think it
love
would,
that. I
yeah,
would love that because I
yeah,
think we're going to see troops at the polls. We could see, and we won't know which polls that they're going to be at because there's not enough National Guard in the world to go to every poll. I think we're going to see. We've already seen gerrymandering in Texas. We might see it in Indiana.
yeah. What we have to do is we have to go through a process as a family with people that have gone through this in other countries and studied this to create a likely set of scenarios. Like what's the likely stuff that could happen as opposed to the fear and loathing, right? Like, oh my God, they're going to cancel the elections and stuff that's not going to happen. But what could happen, right? And I think that part of what I was listening to you is that one of the things that people need to realize is one of the most powerful things that we have, tools that we have, is early voting. And it's why everyone has to vote early. If you have the luxury of voting in any of these states this year, you need to vote as early as you possibly can for two reasons, right?
The
One is,
mail.
yeah, mail or in person. I mean, I prefer to vote in person. That's my own preference, but everyone has. I just feel like I watch it happen and I just feel good about it, right? But there are two reasons why the early vote matters so much. One is that it makes it much harder for them to disrupt voting on election day if 65% of the vote has already come in, right? And the second reason why is that the way politics works, elections work, is that when you vote early, the campaigns know that you voted early. They don't know how you voted, but they know that you voted. And then you come off the GOTV rolls. And what it means is that they can now move on to lower propensity voters faster. And when they do that, that increases the number of Democrats that vote. So voting early actually increases turnout and makes it more likely we win. And so for those of you watching and listening today, or when you get to this, it's critical that for those of you who are living in Pennsylvania, California, New Jersey, and Virginia, that you vote as early as you can, whether it's the day the mail ballot comes or if you prefer to do it in person. Do not wait. Do it as early as you can.
I have a third reason
Yeah,
for you
yeah,
too,
go,
because
go.
Donald Trump controls the mail. So
Right.
you want to get it in as early as possible in
Yeah,
case there's
no,
any delay shenanigans.
there's a way. The reason that I think that Trump has been so antagonistic to this expansion of voting, which happened, in where we've made it much easier for people to vote in America. Um, because we know from data, by the way, that one of the biggest inhibitors to voting was just people working on election day, right? It was just, I mean, honestly, it wasn't intent. It was that they just couldn't make it fly. They got kids, they got a job, right? Everything else. And you would be shocked with how much of a factor that is actually in people not
No,
voting,
I mean,
right?
it's the
Yeah,
difference between the 2020 and the 2024 election. It was easier to vote in 2020 because of
yeah.
COVID and
Right,
because
right.
30
Yep,
states had mail-in voting that didn't have it before. And
yeah,
we saw the difference. When it's easier to vote, it's much better for
yeah,
for our side.
yeah. And so to your point is that it's just very important that we have to recognize that using the system to vote early, because the other thing that happens, by the way, is that it means that if anything were to happen on election day, some kind of intervention, an attack, anything, right? There's a massive amount of vote that's already come in that can't be wished away. And so I think that Trump really, I think he came to this kind of attack on the system. One is because he felt it benefited us. But the other reason is that it made it harder for him to manipulate election day voting. And because most countries don't have the kind of early vote stuff that we have, everyone in small countries, this all go vote one day, right? And I think that, look, I will end with this, is that I think that we're going to come to know in future years that Trump's relationship to Putin was a mentor and a student. He was a Padawan to the Jedi Putin. That Putin coached him and schooled him in how to do what he's doing, because because Donald Trump is an idiot and he's crazy and he's been too good at this. And I think that he's gotten coaching. And I think that one of the things that he and Putin talk about is this crazy election system that we have, where people have all these alternative ways of voting other than election day, because it's much harder for an autocrat to control the elections if everyone votes in person on one day. And so I do think it's a sort of, there's dark reasons, I think, also why, that he's pursued this path and attacking and undermining our election systems. But yeah, I think I really appreciate that question, because this comes up a lot in the hopium world, and about sort of how do we handle this threat to democracy. And I think we have to view it as just another element of the broad threat that he represents to our democratic system. It's just one piece of it,
Yeah,
along with all the other.
it's an obstacle that has to be negotiated.
Yeah.
We've long seen voter suppression from the right, and we've negotiated it. We're already down 7 points on the general ballot just because of gerrymandering in this country.
Yeah.
So we've long seen it's just on steroids now, because the party in power has these big, huge levers that they can try to pull. to impact it. But yeah, it's just an obstacle that needs to be negotiated. And if we know those obstacles ahead of time,
Right.
it's far more likely that we can negotiate them with some skill and alacrity and effulgence.
And success.
Yes,
And
success.
success.
It's been amazing talking to you, my friend. I hope we get to do this again sometime. And I want to thank everybody who's been listening. If you get a chance, please subscribe to the Hopium Chronicles. It's well worth that little bit of sunshine in your inbox. And Simon gives it to you straight too. It's not just all rainbows up your what. And also, if you get a chance, subscribe to my Substack, Mueller She Wrote. There's sometimes breaking down of legal analysis. Sometimes I actually get some scoops from some folks inside the federal government, like Ghislaine Maxwell's Bureau of Prisons point screen that I was able to report. She got that sex offender waiver, stuff like that. So we really look forward to communicating with you and growing these communities and like you said, and growing the circle of dissent. So we really appreciate everybody being here. Do you have any final thought?
No, just thank you. It was great to hang out with you. I've been a follower of yours for so long, and just appreciate all the work that you do. And it was just fun to come hang out today and chat. And thanks everybody for joining us and being part of this. We need to go win the fall together, and we need to make this. Our goal should be together to have the story of the end of the year of politics be that the tide has begun to turn against Donald Trump and MAGA. And can we do it? Well, let's go try as hard as we can.
Yep, win the fall, and I look forward to working with you on a Project 2026.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.